the realm.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back for another Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire update video. What I want to do today is go over some of the things that George R. R. Martin has had to say about Game of Thrones, as well as his next book, The Winds of Winter. For the most part, George R. R. Martin has stayed relatively silent about the ending of Game of Thrones, as well as when he thinks The Winds of Winter will get released. Over the years, this has led to many fans speculating about why they think The Winds of Winter continues to get delayed. Some say he was waiting for Game of Thrones to end, while others say he will never release the next book. Also, he hasn't said a whole lot about what he thinks of the final season of Game of Thrones. As you all know, this universe is his very own creation. He has been writing A Song of Ice and Fire ever since the 1990s. When he finally agreed to let HBO adapt his work into a television show, he was initially helping them bring it to life on the screen. Every season, he would even write one of the episodes himself, which ended up becoming some of the best episodes in the series, like the Battle at Blackwater Bay and The Lion and the Rose. Well, it was right around season 5 when George started to distance himself from the show. That also happened to be right around the same time when the show was no longer following the books. Ever since then, he hasn't said very much about the show. This is one of the many reasons why fans started to think he was no longer liking the direction the show was heading in. Well, now that it's finally over, he did have something to say. I want to read exactly what he wrote, but like I said, I also want to read what he said about the Winds of Winter. Now, some of you may have already seen this, but I think most of you will find it to be very interesting like I did. The very first thing I want to look at is what was said about the Winds of Winter. Since it has been delayed so many times, some think that George was contractually obligated to wait until Game of Thrones was over before he could release it. Now, this is something that fans have been saying for years, but it wasn't until one of the actors from Game of Thrones said it that led to George actually having to come out and address it because he did not want everyone thinking that it was true. During an interview, the actor, who we all knew as Barristan Selmy, decided to say this for whatever reason. Here's what he had to say.
Is that George has already written books 6 and 7.
Джордж уже написал шестую и седьмую книги.
And as far as he is concerned, there only are 7 books.
И по его данным всего 7.
But he struck an agreement with David and Dan, the showrunners of the series,
Но у него есть соглашение с шоураннерами сезона Дэвидом и Дэном,
that he would not publish the final 2 books until the series has completed.
что он их не опубликует пока.
So as you can see, this Game of Thrones actor said George not only had The Winds of Winter done, but he also had A Dream of Spring done, which is said to be the final book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. As soon as fans heard this, it started to spread across the internet like wildfire. Well, it eventually made its way to George R. R. Martin, and he was not very happy about it. Now, most of the time, he would not even acknowledge something like this, but since one of the actors said it, he felt like he should say something before everyone starts to believe it. Now let's look at what George had to say. Internet journalism is an oxymoron. I am more and more convinced. Of late it seems there's a news story about me somewhere on the net every day, or near enough to make no matter. Many get things wrong. For the most part, I ignore them. I have better things to do than to try and track down every weird rumor or out-and-out fabrication that pops up on some obscure website trolling for traffic. Every so often, however, one of those stories gains an improbable currency, and just chuckling at the insanity no longer suffices. That seems to be happening right now. All of a sudden, this crazy story about me finishing The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring years ago is popping up everywhere. No, I am not going to provide links. I don't want to reward purveyors of misinformation with hits. I will, however, say for the record, no, The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring are not finished. Dream has not even begun. I am not going to start writing Volume 7 until I finish Volume 6. It seems absurd to me that I need to state this. The world is round. The earth revolves around the sun. Water is wet. Do I need to say that too? It boggles me that anyone would believe this story, even for an instant. It makes not a whit of sense. Why would I sit for years on completed novels? Why would my publishers, not just here in the US but all around the world, ever consent to this? They make millions and millions of dollars every time a new Ice and Fire book comes out, as do I. Delaying makes no sense. Why would HBO want the books delayed? The books help create interest in the show, just as the show creates interest in the books. So, no, the books are not done. HBO did not ask me to delay them, nor did David and Dan. There is no deal to hold back on the books. I assure you, HBO and David and Dan would both have been thrilled and delighted if The Winds of Winter had been delivered and published 4 or 5 years ago. And no one would have been more delighted than me. I have said it before, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Except here, of course. So, as you can see, he shot this down almost immediately. The actor who said it during the interview most likely read something on the internet, then decided to say it because it sounded reasonable enough. We all would like to think that he would have had this book done by now. If you look at every other release date for his books in the A Song of Ice and Fire series, it has never taken him this long to finish a book. A Game of Thrones first came out back on August 1st, 1996. He started working on this story literally decades ago. The next book that came out, A Clash of Kings, was released on November 16th, 1998. So from the time the first book came out until the second book came out, there was only a 2-year and 3-month gap. Then his next book, A Storm of Swords, came out at the end of the year 2000. So it was basically another 2 years to finish another book. Now the next book, A Feast for Crows, is when he really starts to slow down. A Feast for Crows doesn't come out until the year 2005. That is a 5-year wait for the next book. Then it was almost 6 years until A Dance with Dragons came out. Now we are waiting for The Winds of Winter, and this one has taken longer than any of the other books. It has almost been 8 years since A Dance with Dragons came out, so you can kind of understand why some fans would think that he has to be already done. Well, let's see what George had to say. He gave a Winds of Winter update only a few days ago. He starts off by saying, "I was surprised last night when Air New Zealand went to the internet to invite me down for a visit, to help me finish my book." Then he basically goes on to say how he has been there before and how much he loves to visit. But at the very end, he does sort of give an update on the status of the Winds of Winter. He says, "As for finishing my book, I fear that New Zealand would distract me entirely too much. Best leave me here in Westeros for the nonce. But I tell you this, if I don't have the Winds of Winter in hand when I arrive in New Zealand for Worldcon, you have my here formal written permission to imprison me in a small cabin on White Island, overlooking that lake of sulfuric acid until I'm done. Just so long as the acidic fumes do not screw up my old DOS word processor, I'll be fine." So what he more or less says is there is no reason why he should not have the Winds of Winter done by the end of the next year. Now, of course, he has said very similar things before. He said he should be done in 2015, 2016, 2017, but it continued to get delayed every single year. However, I myself am fairly optimistic. I do happen to think he is very close to getting it done. He hasn't given himself a deadline in quite some time, so considering he is now saying this, I would like to believe him. As we all know, the ending of Game of Thrones was so heavily criticized, I think it may have motivated him even more to get it done soon. So now that you have seen what he said about the Winds of Winter, let's see what George said after Game of Thrones was over. He said, "The last night, the last show. After 8 epic seasons, HBO's Game of Thrones series has come to an end. It is hard to believe that it is over, if truth be told. The years have gone by in the blink of an eye. Can it really have been more than a decade since my manager set up a meeting at the Palm in LA, and I sat down for the first time with David Benioff and DB Weiss for a lunch that lasted well past dinner? I did ask them if they knew who Jon Snow's mother was. Fortunately, they did. That was how it started. It ended last night. I had no clue that afternoon at the Palm that I was about to embark on a journey that would change my life. I had optioned books and stories for television and film before, and some had even been made. There was no way to know that this was going to be different, that this pilot would not only be shot, but would go on to become the most successful show in the history of HBO, win a record number of Emmy Awards, and become the most popular and most pirated show in the world, and transform a group of talented, but largely unknown actors into major celebrities and stars. Even less did I imagine that I would somehow become a celebrity as well. And if truth be told, I'm still not sure how that happened. It has been a wild ride to say the least. I want to thank people, but there are so many. There were 42 cast members at the Season 8 premiere in New York City, and that wasn't even all of them. And the crew, though less visible than the cast, were no less important. We had some amazing people working on this show, as all those Emmys bear witness. David and Dan assembled a championship team. The directors were incredible as well. I should start naming names, but then I'd miss someone. There were so many. But I do need to mention David Benioff, Dan Weiss, and Brian Cogman, the third head of the dragon, as I said in the recent Vanity Fair piece about him. And of course the great team at HBO. Any other network and Game of Thrones would not have been what it became. Most other networks, this series never gets made at all. I could go on, and have, as I've been writing this post in my head. But there's really too much to say. Parting is such sweet sorrow, the bard wrote. In the weeks and months to come, I may post about some of my favorite moments from the making of the show, now and again when I am feeling nostalgic. But just now, there are so many memories and no time to do them all justice. Let me say this much, last night was an ending, but it was also a beginning. Nobody is retiring anytime soon. David and Dan are going on to Star Wars and other projects beyond that. Amazon scooped up Brian Cogman and put him to work on developing shows of his own, as well as helping out on their big Tolkien project. Our brilliant cast has scattered to the four winds, but you'll be seeing a lot of them in the years to come, in all manners of television shows and movies. Our directors are keeping busy as well. I suspect that you have not seen The Last of Westeros on your television sets either, but I guess that all depends on how some of these successor shows turn out. And me? I'm still here, and I'm still busy. As a producer, I've got 5 shows in development at HBO, some having nothing whatsoever to do with the world of Westeros. I have 2 at Hulu, 1 on the History Channel. I'm involved with a number of feature projects, some based upon my own stories and books, and some material created by others. There are these short films that I'm hoping to make, adaptions of classic stories by one of the most brilliant, quirky, and original writers our genre has ever produced. And I'm writing. Winter is coming, I told you, long ago, and so it is. The Winds of Winter is very late, I know, but it will be done. I won't say when, I've tried that before, only to burn you all and jinx myself. But I will finish it, and then will come A Dream of Spring. How will it end? I hear people asking. The same ending as the show? Different? Well, yes, and no, and yes and no, and yes and no, and yes. I am working in a very different medium than David and Dan, never forget. They had 6 hours for the final season. I am expecting these last 2 books of mine will fill 3,000 manuscript pages between them before I'm done. And if more pages and chapters and scenes are needed, I'll add them. And of course, the butterfly effect will be at work as well. Those of you who follow this Naughtablog will know that I've been talking about this since Season 1. There are characters who never made it onto the screen at all, and others who died in the show but still live in the books. So if nothing else, the readers will learn what happened to all of the other characters. Book or show, which will be the real ending? It's a silly question. How many children did Scarlett O'Hara have? How about this? I'll write it, you read it, then everyone can make up their own mind and argue about it on the internet. So at the end of the day, I know I'm still very optimistic about the future. I believe we will get the Winds of Winter very soon, as well as another show that is based on his A Song of Ice and Fire universe. Like George said, Game of Thrones might be over, but I suspect this will not be the last time that we visit Westeros on our televisions. So, let me know what you think about these updates. Leave me some of your thoughts down below. Once again, I want to thank everyone for stopping by to watch another video, and I also want to thank everyone for supporting the channel. I hope you have a great day. I will see you again very soon. Bye.